They had called her scope shy for months, a taunt that seemed to follow her every time she stepped into the training field, a shadow she could not shake even when she tried to drown it out with discipline and silence. Lena had joined the academy with a fire in her heart, dreaming of proving herself as one of the finest marksmen in the division, but the sneers of her peers chipped away at her confidence piece by piece. It wasn't that she was incompetent. She could shoot well enough at mid-range, but whenever the scope was placed against her eye, her nerves would betray her. She would blink too long, shift her focus too much, or tense her body in that split second where control mattered most. In a place where precision defined worth, that hesitation became a scarlet letter, and the others, mostly men who had grown up with rifles in their hands, treated her as a joke waiting to happen. They would nudge each other when it was her turn, whisper crude bets about how badly she would miss, and when the shot inevitably landed wide, they would burst out laughing, disguising their cruelty as harmless ribbing. She would clench her jaw, pretending not to hear, but deep inside the words settled like stones in her chest, heavy and suffocating. She had been raised differently, in a quiet mountain town where hunting was done more with patience than machinery, and where her father had taught her to track deer by reading the trees and the wind. He had never believed in belittling mistakes, only in persistence, but here persistence wasn't enough. Here it was about bravado, speed, and ruthless competition. She learned to endure, swallowing her pride with every humiliating remark, but each insult only sharpened the blade of resolve within her. The commanding officers saw potential in her steady hands and calm breathing patterns, but even they admitted she lacked the killer instinct that defined a sniper. She was too deliberate, too hesitant, they claimed, and while they did not mock her outright, their quiet dismissal sometimes cut deeper than the open laughter of her peers. She tried to train harder, staying longer at the range, firing until her shoulder throbbed and her vision blurred, but the harder she pushed, the more she felt the weight of expectation smother her focus. The term, scope shy, echoed in her mind even when no one said it aloud, until it began to feel like a curse she had been born with. There was one man in particular who seemed to take special joy in her struggles. Cade, a brash recruit with a natural eye for long shots, often made it his mission to humiliate her. He strutted around the barracks like a rooster, telling anyone who would listen about his perfect aim, and when Lena faltered, he was always the first to crack a joke. "Careful, don't let her look through a scope, she might faint," he sneered once, loud enough for everyone to hear. Another time he told her, "Maybe try knitting instead, you're better with needles than bullets." Each word struck like a blow, but she refused to rise to his bait, for she knew anger would only prove his point. Still, his voice haunted her, and in quiet moments she replayed his mockery, sometimes wondering if maybe he was right. Perhaps she wasn't cut out for this world of precision and pressure. Perhaps her dreams had been naive. Yet quitting was never an option. She remembered her father's words, spoken years ago when she had missed her first shot at a deer. "The forest doesn't laugh at you, Lena. Only people do. You wait, you breathe, and when the moment comes you take it." That lesson clung to her like an anchor, steadying her against the tide of doubt. So she stayed, endured the jokes, and kept showing up, even when it felt like a battle just to lift the rifle again. What no one realized was that every failure became fuel, every cruel word a spark. She was teaching herself patience in a place that worshipped speed, and though it looked like weakness, it was slowly becoming her greatest strength. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon during a joint training exercise. The recruits were lined up for a long-range accuracy drill, with targets placed at distances most would struggle to hit cleanly. Cade, predictably, went first, puffing out his chest as he landed his shots with flashy precision, earning cheers from his friends. Others followed, hitting or missing with varying degrees of success, but the mood was light-hearted, playful. When Lena's turn came, the laughter began even before she picked up her rifle. "Don't fall asleep on us, scope shy," someone called. "Bet she won't even hit the board," another chimed in. Her face burned, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She settled into position, breathing in, exhaling slowly, pressing her cheek against the stock. Her heart pounded in her ears as she lifted the scope to her eye. The target blurred, wavered, and the old panic rose like a tide, threatening to drown her focus. For a moment she nearly pulled back, ready to accept yet another humiliation, but then she remembered her father's voice and forced herself to breathe, not to think of the crowd, only of the stillness between heartbeats. Her first shot went wide and the laughter erupted again. She bit her tongue, loading another round. Her second shot missed too, though it clipped closer. "Hopeless," Cade said, shaking his head theatrically. Something in her snapped then, not anger but a quiet, steady defiance. She inhaled again, tuned out the voices, and let the world shrink to the circle of glass before her eye. She did not blink this time, did not twitch. She let the target settle, let her body fall into the rhythm she had learned in the forest as a girl. When she squeezed the trigger, the shot rang out with crisp finality. A heartbeat later, the bullet punched through the center ring. The laughter stopped. The sudden silence was louder than any jeer had ever been. She lowered the rifle and glanced up, meeting Cade's stunned eyes. For once, he had no words. The silence that followed her shot felt heavier than all the laughter that had ever mocked her, and though the target still swung faintly from the impact, no one moved, no one spoke, not even Cade. Lena kept her eyes steady, her breathing calm, her hands still on the rifle as if daring anyone to laugh now. She loaded another round without hesitation and pressed her cheek back to the stock. The world outside the scope disappeared, replaced by the narrow tunnel of focus that no longer felt like a prison but like a path. Her second shot cracked the air, striking just beside the first, the two holes nearly touching in the bullseye. This time, a low murmur rippled through the recruits, not mocking but stunned, uncertain, as if they were seeing someone they had overlooked for too long. Cade's smirk faltered, and for the first time she saw doubt flicker in his eyes. She didn't stop there. She fired again and again, each bullet finding its mark with a precision that felt less like chance and more like destiny. By the time her clip was empty, the center of the target was ragged with holes, proof that the girl they had dismissed as scope-shy had been waiting for her moment to unleash what she had carried all along. When she rose from the firing line, no one jeered. They only stared, some in awe, others in envy, and though a few tried to mask it with forced laughter, the sound was brittle, hollow, stripped of its old venom. Cade opened his mouth, searching for a quip, but none came. His silence was a victory louder than any applause. Lena walked past him without a word, but she did not need to speak. Her eyes, calm and unyielding, said everything. She had endured their cruelty, their doubts, their scorn, and in a single string of shots she had shattered it all. That night, the barracks were unusually quiet. Cade sulked in the corner, his friends whispering uneasily, while Lena sat alone by her bunk, replaying the moment over and over. She felt no giddy rush, no triumph that demanded celebration. Instead, she felt an odd stillness, like a storm had finally passed and left her in its calm. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore, it was about proving to herself that she had never been broken in the first place. Word spread quickly as it always did in the academy. By the next morning, officers had heard about the impossible Keyhole shot, the girl who had once been a laughingstock now suddenly the subject of hushed conversations and grudging respect. Some said it had been luck, a fluke born of desperation, while others insisted no one could land that many center hits by accident. The instructors summoned her to the range again, this time without the chatter of recruits or the sneers of her rivals. They set up fresh targets at extreme distances, well beyond the comfort zone of most trainees, and told her to fire. She did not hesitate. Shot after shot rang out, each landing closer to perfection than the last, until even the instructors were exchanging glances, surprised, perhaps even embarrassed, that they had overlooked her potential. One of them, a grizzled veteran with eyes like stone, finally said, "You're not scope-shy, cadet. You were just waiting to remember who you are." The words struck deeper than any praise she had received before, because they rang with truth. She wasn't transformed by luck, she had been carrying the skill all along, forged in the quiet lessons of her father and honed by the years of humiliation that had demanded her patience. Cade, however, refused to let go of his pride. He approached her later that day, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Don't think one lucky streak makes you better than me," he muttered, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You had your moment, but it won't last. Real skill doesn't come from hiding behind patience." Lena met his gaze and said nothing, for she had learned that silence was the sharpest blade. The lack of response unsettled him more than any comeback, and he stalked away, muttering under his breath. His jealousy became a shadow that followed her, whispering challenges, daring her to stumble, but with each passing day his words carried less weight. She no longer measured herself against him or the others, she measured herself only against the stillness within, the rhythm of her breath, the clarity of her aim. The academy began to assign her to specialized drills, pairing her with recruits who once would have mocked her but now watched with cautious respect. She noticed their glances, the way they studied her grip, her stance, her timing, as though trying to understand what had changed. But nothing had changed, not really. The only difference was that she had stopped fearing the moment before the shot, the heartbeat of doubt that once crippled her. She had learned to embrace it, to let it pass like wind through trees, and in that acceptance she found freedom. Her performance improved so rapidly that rumors began to circulate beyond the academy walls. Some whispered she might even qualify for the elite sniper program, a path reserved for only the most exceptional. The idea both thrilled and frightened her, for it meant stepping into a world where failure had consequences far graver than laughter. At night she still lay awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the restless shuffle of recruits around her. She thought of her father, of the mountain forests and the quiet hunts where she had first learned patience. She wondered what he would think if he could see her now, no longer the timid girl mocked for her hesitation, but a marksman whose name carried weight. She did not crave glory, but she did crave the moment when Cade's smirk had faltered, the silence that followed her shot, the undeniable truth that skill could not be denied forever. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The real test would not come in training drills or competitions, but in the field, where lives would depend on her ability to hold steady, to breathe through fear, and to see through the narrow keyhole of her scope. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a different world, though Lena knew it was the same barracks, the same range, the same faces that had once laughed at her. The difference was subtle but undeniable. Where before she had been invisible except as the butt of a joke, now eyes followed her with a wary curiosity. Some offered quiet nods of respect when they thought no one was looking, while others, unwilling to abandon their old habits, tried to cling to dismissive comments that no longer landed with the same sting. Cade was the loudest of those, though even his friends grew tired of his bitterness. He would challenge her constantly, setting up competitions at the range, hoping to catch her in a mistake, to prove her keyhole shot had been nothing but a fluke. And though sometimes her shots fell short, though sometimes the wind shifted or her hands trembled, she no longer collapsed under the weight of those moments. She would simply reload, reset, and fire again, while Cade grew redder with each attempt to outshine her. The irony was that in trying to undermine her, he only made her sharper, for every contest became another chance to refine her skill under pressure. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of drills, the commanding officer summoned her to his office. The room was dimly lit, lined with maps and weapons schematics, and the officer sat behind a desk cluttered with files. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and deliberate. "Cadet Lena, I've received reports of your performance. Some describe you as erratic, others as extraordinary. Tell me which is true." She hesitated, not knowing what answer he wanted, then said softly, "Both, sir. I fail but I don't stop." The officer's stern expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of approval hidden beneath the surface. He tapped a finger on the desk, then leaned back in his chair. "Persistence is good, but persistence without results is useless. You've shown results now. The question is, can you deliver them when it counts?" Lena straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I can, sir." He studied her another moment, then slid a folder across the desk. "You'll join the next field simulation. Consider it your chance to prove that your patience and precision aren't just training range tricks." The simulation was notorious among the recruits, a brutal exercise designed to mimic the chaos of real battle. Squads were dropped into the wilderness with limited supplies, tasked with completing objectives while fending off surprise ambushes from instructors acting as enemy combatants. Many recruits cracked under the pressure, unable to balance strategy with survival. Lena felt the weight of the assignment pressing against her chest as she prepared, but she also felt a strange calm. This was what she had been waiting for, the chance to show that she was not just a girl who could shoot clean targets but a soldier who could endure the storm. Cade, of course, made sure to be on her squad, grinning as if he expected her to crumble under the real test. "Don't slow us down," he muttered as they assembled at dawn. Lena ignored him, focusing instead on checking her rifle, her ammunition, her breathing. The transport dropped them deep into the forest, the canopy thick and the ground slick with dew. The air was alive with the sound of birds and insects, but beneath it all was the constant edge of tension, the knowledge that every rustle of leaves could conceal an ambush. The squad moved cautiously, Cade at the front with his usual arrogance, Lena at the rear, scanning the treeline through her scope. Hours passed with nothing but nerves to keep them company, until suddenly a burst of gunfire shattered the quiet. Instructors hidden in the brush unleashed a surprise attack, blank rounds cracking through the air as recruits scattered for cover. Cade barked orders, his voice shrill with panic, while Lena pressed her body low, letting instinct take over. She spotted a glint of metal through a narrow gap between two tree trunks, a target barely visible, but her hands were steady, her breath even. She squeezed the trigger, and the instructor dropped with a yelp, his vest sensor flashing to signal a hit. The squad scrambled, chaos threatening to tear them apart, but Lena's calm precision slowly pulled them back together. Each time an ambusher revealed themselves, she was there, her shots threading through impossible openings, guiding the squad forward. By the end of the exercise, they had not only survived but completed every objective faster than most squads before them. When they returned to base, mud-streaked and exhausted, the instructors gathered to debrief. Cade tried to take credit, boasting of his leadership, but the officers had watched the entire operation through drones. They knew the truth. One instructor looked directly at Lena and said, "Without her, you'd all have been wiped in the first ambush." The squad murmured in agreement, and though Cade's face darkened, he could not deny it. For Lena, the recognition was not about glory but about validation. She had faced the storm and had not faltered. That night, lying in her bunk, she thought about how far she had come from the girl who once blinked too long behind the scope, drowning in the jeers of her peers. She realized that what had changed was not just her aim but her belief in herself. She had stopped measuring her worth by the laughter of others and started trusting the silence inside her, the rhythm her father had taught her long ago. The Keyhole shot had been a beginning, not an end. Now she knew there would always be voices like Cade's, ready to sneer and mock, but she also knew that silence could cut deeper than words, and that precision could silence even the loudest doubts. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of the forest fade into sleep, ready for whatever challenge awaited next. The following weeks hardened into a rhythm of drills, simulations, and long nights in the barracks, but Lena carried herself differently now. The mockery that once weighed her down no longer clung to her, and though Cade still lingered like a shadow, always watching, always itching to reclaim the spotlight, she no longer lived under his shadow. She had begun to discover something deeper than skill. She was finding resilience, a center that could not be shaken by ridicule or doubt. The instructors noticed it too, testing her with increasingly difficult drills, setting up moving targets at absurd distances, staging ambushes in low light, even pairing her against Cade in precision challenges. Each time, Lena rose to the test, not always perfect, not always flawless, but steady, consistent, relentless. Cade, in his desperation to best her, began to crack, his shots growing erratic whenever she was nearby, his anger at every miss boiling over into curses and excuses. The same recruits who once laughed at Lena began to turn their laughter on him, though more carefully, for Cade's temper was as sharp as his arrogance. One evening, after another grueling day of training, Lena found herself in the mess hall, sitting alone at the edge of a long table. A few of the younger recruits glanced her way, then approached hesitantly, trays in hand. "Can we sit here?" one of them asked, voice uncertain. Lena nodded, and they settled around her, nervous but curious. Soon questions began, about her stance, her breathing, how she had managed to fire through such narrow openings during the simulation. She answered quietly, explaining not in boasts but in simple truths, about patience, about trust in silence, about waiting for the right heartbeat. The recruits listened intently, their eyes wide with admiration. For the first time, Lena realized she was no longer just proving herself. She was becoming someone others looked to for guidance. It was a strange feeling, both humbling and empowering, and she carried it with care, never letting it swell into pride. She remembered too vividly what it was like to be mocked, and she vowed never to make anyone else feel that way. Cade, however, could not stand the shift. One night, he confronted her outside the barracks, his face tight with fury. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" he spat. Lena met his glare calmly. "No," she said simply. "I don't think about you at all." The word struck harder than any insult, and Cade's fists clenched at his sides. For a moment it looked as if he might lash out, but he stopped himself, sneering instead. "You'll break in the field," he hissed. "All that calm will shatter the first time you see real blood." He turned and stormed off, leaving Lena standing under the cold night sky. She did not answer him, but his words lingered in her mind. He wasn't entirely wrong. Training was one thing. The field was another. Real bullets, real lives, she had not yet faced that trial. But instead of filling her with fear, the thought steeled her further. She knew it was coming, and when it did, she would be ready. That test arrived sooner than she expected. A message came down that the academy would be deploying select recruits to assist in a live operation, not as frontline soldiers but as support, a way to harden them under the weight of reality. Lena's name was on the list. Cade's was too. The mission was simple on paper but dangerous in execution. A convoy of supply vehicles had to cross a hostile zone, and the recruits would serve as overwatch, scanning ridges and treelines for ambushes. Failure meant lives lost. The night before the operation, Lena lay awake in her bunk, listening to the creak of the building, the murmur of recruits whispering nervously. Her rifle rested by her side, freshly cleaned, her scope gleaming faintly in the dim light. She thought of her father again, his quiet lessons in the forest, his insistence that patience mattered more than speed, silence more than noise. She closed her eyes and held on to that memory, letting it anchor her as sleep finally claimed her. The next morning, the air buzzed with tension as they assembled at the transport. Cade smirked as if to hide his nerves, while others fidgeted, adjusting their gear over and over. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken, but she breathed steadily, grounding herself in the rhythm that had carried her this far. The convoy rolled out across rough terrain, dust rising in plumes behind the armored vehicles. The recruits spread out to higher ground, scanning the valleys and ridges with scopes, every shadow a potential threat. Hours passed with nothing and some began to relax, but Lena did not. She kept her eyes steady, tracing the treeline, watching the wind bend the grass. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement, a glint of metal just for an instant through a gap between rocks. Her pulse surged, but her breath remained calm. She squeezed the trigger and her shot cracked the silence. A figure tumbled from the ridge, his rifle clattering down the slope. The ambush had been spotted before it could begin. Gunfire erupted a heartbeat later, enemies bursting from cover, but Lena was already firing again, her shots threading through gaps in rocks, through slivers of space that seemed impossible. Each hit disrupted the attack, giving the convoy the precious seconds to push forward. Around her, recruits shouted, scrambled, some panicked, but her calm held, her aim steady. Cade fired too, but his shots were rushed, wild, his frustration mounting as Lena's precision cut through the chaos. By the time the convoy cleared the danger zone, the ground behind them was littered with fallen enemies and silence returned to the ridges. The officers called the mission a success, and the convoy rolled on unscathed. When they returned to base, the debrief was short but heavy with meaning. The instructors made note of Lena's vigilance, her precision, her ability to spot the threat before anyone else. Cade, though he had fought hard, had no accolades waiting for him, and his smirk was nowhere to be seen. The recruits who had once doubted her now looked at her with something close to awe, and Lena realized she had crossed another threshold. She had faced not just the jeers of her peers, not just the chaos of simulation but the reality of combat, and she had not faltered. That night, as she cleaned her rifle under the dim glow of the barracks lamp, she felt the weight of the word scope shy lift completely from her shoulders. It no longer defined her. It never truly had. In the days following the operation, Lena felt something shift in the air around her. The recruits who had once dismissed her no longer whispered when she passed. Instead, they gave her quiet nods or asked her questions about tactics. Even the instructors treated her differently now, not as a student barely keeping up but as someone who might soon stand among the elite. Yet with respect came pressure, and Lena knew she could not afford to falter. She kept training long after others had collapsed into their bunks, running drills in the fading light, her body aching but her mind locked on the knowledge that she had to be sharper, steadier, stronger. Cade meanwhile grew more isolated. His arrogance, once tolerated because of his skill, now seemed hollow compared to Lena's calm results. He snapped at his squad mates, muttered bitter comments about favoritism, and pushed himself harder in the range, but his desperation showed in every rushed shot. Lena saw it but did not speak. She had no interest in his unraveling. Her focus was on the horizon, on the knowledge that the academy was not the end but the beginning. One evening she was called to the officers' quarters again. The same grizzled veteran who had once doubted her sat across from her, his hands folded on the desk. He studied her with that same stone-eyed intensity, then slid a folder toward her. Inside were photographs of rugged terrain, outposts, and red-marked objectives. "Cadet Lena," he said slowly, "you are being considered for the advanced sniper program. Few make it this far and fewer still graduate. It will test everything you think you know about patience, endurance, and precision. Do you believe you're ready?" Lena felt her throat tighten, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." The officer leaned back, watching her carefully. "Confidence is easy in words. It is harder in the field. This program is not about skill alone. It's about the mind, about surviving not just the shot but the silence before and after. I see promise in you, but promise means nothing if you can't hold steady when the world collapses around you." His words etched themselves into her mind, heavy but sharp, a truth she could not ignore. Training for the advanced program began at dawn the next day, and Lena quickly learned it was unlike anything she had experienced before. Gone were the structured drills and predictable exercises of the academy. Here, recruits were stripped of comfort and control, forced to endure days without proper sleep, rations cut to a bare minimum, and missions staged under punishing conditions. They were dropped into swamps, mountains, deserts, each environment designed to test not only their aim but their will to persist when exhaustion and despair gnawed at them. Lena suffered alongside the others, her muscles screaming, her vision blurring, but she clung to the same patience that had carried her through mockery and humiliation. Where others cursed or broke down, she kept breathing, steady and silent, waiting for the storm inside her body to pass. The instructors were merciless, setting up targets that could only be seen for a fraction of a second, demanding hits through slits barely wider than a coin, forcing recruits to hold positions for hours without movement. Some failed outright, collapsing in frustration or missing too many shots to continue. Lena watched them go, feeling both pity and warning in their defeat. Cade, to her surprise, had also been admitted into the program, and though his natural skill carried him far, his temper remained his weakness. During a grueling endurance exercise, when recruits were forced to crawl through mud while maintaining their rifles above water, Cade cursed loudly, thrashing, his rifle slipping lower. Lena passed him silently, focused only on keeping her weapon steady. Later, he muttered insults at her under his breath, but his voice no longer carried the sting it once had. He was flailing against his own doubts, and Lena had no intention of drowning with him. It was during one of the most punishing exercises that Lena faced her greatest test yet. The recruits were ordered to hold sniper positions overlooking a valley for an entire night, scanning for hidden markers placed by instructors. The wind howled, rain lashed at their faces, and the cold seeped into their bones. Hours stretched into eternity, fatigue clawing at her eyelids, her muscles trembling with the effort of staying still. Cade cursed nearby, shifting too often, his frustration breaking the silence, but Lena closed her eyes for just a heartbeat at a time, breathing in rhythm, anchoring herself to the memory of hunting in the mountains with her father. She remembered his voice telling her that the forest does not laugh, that patience was stronger than pride. When the faint glint of a marker finally appeared through the rain, Lena was ready. Her shot cracked through the storm, striking dead center. The instructors noted it, their faces unreadable, but she knew she had passed something larger than their test. She had passed herself. By the end of the advanced program's first phase, fewer than half the recruits remained. Lena was among them, her resolve hardened by every sleepless night, every impossible shot, every aching hour of stillness. Cade was still there too, but his pride was now a brittle mask, his eyes shadowed with the weight of barely keeping up. He avoided her gaze more often than not, though sometimes she caught him staring at her with a mixture of anger and something else. Fear, perhaps, or recognition that the balance between them had shifted permanently. Lena did not dwell on it. Her path was no longer about proving herself against him or anyone else. It was about mastering the silence, the breath, the stillness that turned impossible shots into inevitabilities. And as the program moved into its next phase, Lena knew the real battles were still ahead, waiting in the shadows where the world would demand not just skill, but the soul of a sniper. The confrontation with Karen and her HOA allies had changed something deep inside me. For weeks, I had tolerated their arrogance, their bullying, and their constant attempts to wrest control of my land. But after the courtroom victory, after standing my ground and watching their schemes collapse like a poorly built house of cards, I realized there was no going back to quietly minding my own business. They had chosen war and I had won the first decisive battle. Now it was time to make sure they could never rise again. The HOA headquarters was a pristine office space located in a neighboring town, far removed from the land they claimed to govern. It was almost comical. These people lived in gated communities and tidy subdivisions, yet they believed they had authority over my lakeside cabin and the surrounding acres of wilderness. On the surface, their office looked professional. Glass walls, shiny desks, and cheerful receptionists. But inside those walls were files, records, and contracts, the very backbone of their operation. If those records ever saw the light of day, the world would know just how corrupt they were. I began gathering my allies again. The local community, once divided, now fully stood behind me. The families who had been fined for nonsense violations, the elderly couple who had nearly lost their home, and the young single mother forced to pay outrageous fees, they all saw me as the one person willing to fight back on their behalf. "It's not just your battle anymore," the old man said one evening as we sat on my porch. "It's all of ours. You've given us hope." Hope was powerful, but I knew we needed more than just spirit. We needed a plan. That's where my father came in. A retired general, sharp-minded and tactically brilliant, he approached the HOA like it was an enemy faction occupying territory. "They rely on intimidation and misinformation," he explained while laying out a map of the county on my kitchen table. "If we cut off their influence and expose their illegal dealings, they'll collapse under their own weight. You've already wounded them in court. Now we finish the job. The plan was simple though risky. We would expose their hidden contracts, their financial mismanagement, and their fraudulent claims of authority. To do that, we needed evidence, and that meant going directly to the source. At night, under the cover of darkness, a small group of us approached their office. My father stayed back as lookout, while 2 others kept the area clear. I slipped inside, using the key we had borrowed from a sympathetic former employee. The office was eerily quiet, the hum of electronics filling the silence. I moved quickly, scanning through file cabinets and hard drives. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. They had been double-charging residents, funneling funds into personal accounts, and even forging signatures to claim rights to properties they didn't own. It was worse than I imagined. They weren't just bullies, they were criminals dressed in the mask of legitimacy. I copied everything onto a flash drive, heart pounding as I worked. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. I froze, listening. The building settled with a creak and the sound faded. I exhaled and hurried out, clutching the drive like it was the most precious thing in the world. The next day we unleashed the truth. With the help of a local journalist, every detail was published. Headlines screamed across newspapers and online feeds, HOA corruption scandal exposed, and fraud, forgery and intimidation, the fall of a neighborhood empire. The response was explosive. Residents who had lived in fear came forward, adding their stories to the growing mountain of evidence. Government officials launched investigations. And Karen, the queen bee of the HOA hive, suddenly found herself drowning in lawsuits and subpoenas. I'll never forget the look on her face when she stormed up my driveway one last time. Gone was her smug smile, replaced by desperation. "You've ruined everything," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do you know what you've done?" I stood firm, arms crossed, unshaken. "No, Karen. You ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light on it." For once, she had no retort. She sputtered, glared, and then left, her empire in ruins. The HOA disbanded within weeks, its members scattering, its reputation shattered beyond repair. Some faced fines, others potential jail time. Karen herself disappeared from the community, unable to face the humiliation of defeat. Life at the cabin slowly returned to normal. The lake shimmered peacefully in the morning sun, the woods rustled with life, and the air no longer carried the tension of looming conflict. But something had changed within me. I wasn't just a cabin owner anymore, I was a defender of my home, my land, and my freedom. And though the battle had been long and bitter, victory was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. In the end, I learned something valuable. Bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, crumble when confronted with truth and courage. The HOA had tried to take everything from me, but instead they lost everything themselves. And as I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise spread its light across the lake, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. The 7th phrase that a woman who wants you might accidentally let slip is hidden in the subtleties of humor, teasing, and the way she allows her playful side to shine through around you. Often, when attraction is present, laughter becomes the bridge that connects 2 people in ways neither logic nor words alone can manage. It is not always the big, obvious declarations that reveal her interest, but rather the small jokes, the soft nudges, and the laughter she reserves only for you. A woman who wants you may accidentally tease you in ways she would not dare with others, and this teasing, beneath its mask of lightheartedness, carries the quiet weight of desire and closeness. You might notice she calls you by nicknames she invents spontaneously, even if they are silly or exaggerated. She could make jokes about your habits, pretending to scold you for the way you always order the same thing at a restaurant, or how you sometimes forget small details. But hidden behind the laughter is her way of saying, "I'm comfortable enough to notice these things about you, and I care enough to playfully bring them up." Teasing in this context is not about ridicule, it's a quiet form of intimacy. It signals she is relaxed in your company and sees you as more than a passing acquaintance. This form of accidental revelation is powerful, for humor has always been the domain of those who feel safe and connected. More than the jokes themselves, it is the way she laughs when she is around you that gives her away. A woman who wants you may laugh more easily at your comments, sometimes even at things that weren't meant to be funny. Her laughter is not forced. It is a slip of her heart showing joy simply because you are the source. She might lean toward you as she laughs, touch your arm lightly as if drawn closer by invisible threads, or glance at your lips for a fraction of a second while she's smiling. These subtle cues often pass unnoticed, but together they paint a vivid portrait of affection that words alone cannot capture. Another accidental phrase that might escape her lips in such playful moments is something like, "You're impossible," or, "I can't with you." On the surface, these are casual remarks, spoken with a laugh, but beneath them lies a deeper current. When she says these words with a sparkle in her eyes, she is not actually expressing frustration. She is acknowledging that you have a unique ability to affect her emotions. Her laughter is her shield, and her teasing is her mask, but what she reveals unintentionally is her admiration for the effect you have on her. Sometimes, the humor takes the form of what-if scenarios, light-hearted imaginary situations where she pretends the two of you are already sharing a deeper connection. She might joke about how you'd be as a travel companion, or how you would handle being married, or who would cook better if the two of you lived together. To the casual ear, these are jokes, but the truth is, her subconscious is slipping through the cracks. Without intending to, she is weaving you into the fabric of her imagined future. These are not mere jokes, they are dreams disguised as laughter. It is in these playful moments that vulnerability and attraction collide most gracefully. For humor, when shared, creates a bond that logic cannot undo. The woman who wants you will sometimes hide her interest in a veil of wit, because it feels safer than direct confession. Yet, her choice to laugh with you, to joke with you, and to playfully engage with you reveals a trust that is not easily won. She is saying, without realizing it, "I feel safe enough around you to show my lighter side." There is also a rhythm to this kind of accidental revelation. You might notice her initiating conversations simply for the sake of exchanging jokes. She might text you something funny she came across, not because she had no one else to share it with, but because she thought of you in that moment. In doing so, she unconsciously admits that you occupy her mind, even when you're apart. Humor becomes her excuse to reach out, her cover for wanting to stay connected. She does not say, "I miss you," directly, but she says it by sending a meme, a joke, or a playful remark. Her playfulness may even show itself in moments when she pretends to be annoyed. She could roll her eyes at something you say, mock complain about your stubbornness, or act as though she is fed up with you, yet her smile never leaves her face. That contradiction between her words and her expressions is the clearest sign of her affection. It is her heart speaking louder than her tongue, a dance between concealment and confession. The beauty of this seventh phrase lies in its subtlety. Unlike grand confessions or dramatic declarations, it arrives softly, wrapped in humor, almost unnoticeable to those who are not paying attention. But for the man who listens not only to words but to the tone behind them, not only to jokes but to the heart that fuels them, it becomes clear. Her laughter belongs more to you than to the world. In the end, when a woman teases you gently, laughs a little too freely in your presence, and playfully imagines futures that include you, she is not merely being humorous. She is letting her guard down in ways she does not with others. And though she may not mean to reveal it, the truth slips through her smile. She wants you even if she hides it behind laughter. The evening breeze whispered across the neighborhood, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of insects beginning their nightly chorus. For John, it felt like the perfect metaphor for what his life had become. A balance of serenity and noise, of peace shadowed by the echoes of past battles with the HOA. Yet tonight was not a night of confrontation. Tonight was about celebration, reflection, and the unshakable truth that sometimes justice takes time, patience, and unflinching determination. The community center was alive with warm lights and laughter. For the first time in years, neighbors gathered not in tension or hushed complaints but in genuine camaraderie. Tables were set with homemade dishes, banners fluttered gently above, and children darted across the hall with carefree joy. At the center of it all stood John, his father, General Anderson, and Emily. They weren't leaders of some campaign anymore. They were simply part of a neighborhood that had found its voice and reclaimed its spirit. As John took a moment to observe the gathering, he felt the weight of the long journey lift from his shoulders. He remembered the countless letters he had written, the late-night strategy meetings with his father, the court appearances, and the sleepless nights when it seemed like Karen and her allies would win. There had been moments of doubt, moments when he questioned if it was even worth the fight. But looking around at the smiling faces, the laughter, and the sense of community that had finally been restored, he knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it. Emily approached him then, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You look lost in thought," she said with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting the golden glow of the lantern strung across the ceiling. "Just remembering everything it took to get here," John replied. His voice carried no bitterness, only gratitude. "It feels surreal, doesn't it? To stand here and know that we actually changed things." Emily nodded. "You didn't just change things, John. You inspired people. You reminded them they didn't have to be afraid. That's something not many can claim. Her words warmed him, and for a moment, the chaos of the past seemed like a distant echo. His father joined them soon after, his posture as commanding as ever despite the years etched into his frame. General Anderson carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had faced far greater battles than HOA board meetings but still recognized the significance of this victory. "You've both done well," he said, his deep voice steady. "What happened here will be remembered. Not because of me, not because of my title, but because people stood up together. That's the real strength." John felt a surge of pride hearing those words. His father had always been his greatest role model, and to see him acknowledge this fight as meaningful filled him with a sense of accomplishment he couldn't put into words. The evening rolled on, filled with toasts and stories. Neighbors shared anecdotes about the ordeal, some humorous, some heartbreaking, but all laced with the relief of knowing those dark days were behind them. The community had been fractured once, but now it was whole. Karen and her supporters had vanished from their lives, their names fading into cautionary tales whispered with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Later, as the night grew quieter, John found himself standing outside beneath the stars. The air was cool, the sky vast and endless. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his. Neither spoke for a while, they simply stood together, listening to the world around them. "You know," Emily said at last, breaking the silence, "this isn't just the end of something. It's the beginning too. You've proven to yourself, and everyone else, that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, truth and resilience can win." John squeezed her hand gently. "I guess you're right. Maybe this was never just about fighting Karen. Maybe it was about learning to trust myself, to trust others, to realize that even the smallest stand can ripple out into something bigger." Emily leaned against him, her voice soft but sure. "That's exactly it. And whatever comes next, you won't be facing it alone." In that moment, John understood something profound. The fight had tested him, broken him down, and built him back stronger. But more importantly, it had connected him to people. His father, Emily, and the entire neighborhood, in ways he could never have imagined before. What once felt like a lonely battle had transformed into a shared triumph, a testament to the power of unity. As the lanterns inside flickered and the night deepened, John felt a rare kind of peace settle over him. He knew life would bring new challenges, there always would be, but this time he would meet them not with fear or doubt, but with courage and conviction. The story of Karen, the HOA, and the battles they fought would eventually fade into the annals of neighborhood lore. But the legacy it left behind, of resilience, of justice, of neighbors reclaiming their right to live free of tyranny, would endure. And in that legacy John found his true victory. He turned to Emily, a smile tugging at his lips. "Here's to new beginnings," he whispered. She returned the smile, her eyes shining with quiet certainty. "To new beginnings," she echoed. And with that, hand in hand, they walked back toward the laughter and light, ready to embrace whatever the future held together. The end.